everyone. My name is Katie of the Greenland Quilter, and I welcome everyone to this next podcast interview. And I have here with me Andi of True Blue Quilts. And I'm going to start out with asking her to tell us about herself a little bit, and then we'll start sliding into the interview questions. So go ahead, Andi.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie. This is really exciting. I love talking to other quilters. We could go on all day. I am a modern-ish quilter in Phoenix, Arizona, and I started sewing as an adult, so I don't have I have a long history of crafting, but didn't really touch a sewing machine until well into my 30s. So.
Okay, so who influenced you to learn how to sew, and how long have you been sewing? And would you describe your learning process as you evolved over time?
Sure. Well, I even printed it on a t-shirt. It's my mom's fault.
All right.
Because she opened a fabric and yarn store as one of her retirement projects. And we live close enough in town here that I was able to be a part of that retail operation. And I had not sewn much. I maybe touched a sewing machine twice before she opened her shop, but being around all that fabric and yarn, you just have to start creating things.
Yeah.
And so I had her expertise to draw on as a beginner, a wonderful, welcoming quilt community in the local area. I started taking classes from traveling teachers, and and just it turned into a total obsession.
How long ago did you create your first beautiful quilt?
Well, it happened in two phases, because my actual very first quilt I made in the mid 1990s for, as a young person, friends starting to have babies, I wanted to make a gift. And so I actually made one quilt, and then I made like one t-shirt and skirt, and then the sewing machine gathered dust for another 20 years. So my actual first quilt of my current quilting era was about 2004. So over 20 years now.
Wow. What are your favorite genres of fabric?
Fabric, I go for batiks a lot of times. Yeah, I'm one of those passionate people. Blue, of course, anything blue and white, and patriotic would be another common color scheme you'll see in my library of quilts. But there's so much gorgeous fabric out there that I hate to limit myself.
Who is your favorite fabric or pattern designer, or do you prefer making your own?
Yes to both. I do follow quite a few designers out there. I have to say that I love almost everything Elizabeth Hartman has ever done.
Nice.
I love her patterns.
She's a big hit these days.
Yeah, her stuff is a lot of fun. I really enjoy Tula Pink's style, but I don't always quilt with it. So like she's had a few lines that have portraits. Some of those big witches, she did a series, and then some of the big animals that she puts like in fancy frames and things. And I don't do a lot with that, but I've heard her talk about her design process, and it's just so fascinating how much research she does when she develops a fabric line. So I just think she's a fascinating person in the design world. So so those are two of my big ones, but I do design a lot of my own patterns. So we'll talk about that a little bit.
So you mentioned something about modern, and I'm going to go ahead and ask the question, even though you made that comment. Are you more traditional or a modern quilter, or are you kind of in between where you're doing some modern and some traditional?
I probably am just over the line into modern because I really have so I would say modern traditionalism, which is
Yeah.
just that, being able to take some of those classic quilt blocks and put a modern spin on them with
Mm-hmm.
some other elements, like deconstructing the blocks to get some of the elements put in a different way. I like a lot of asymmetrical layouts, which is another one of the quote modern design elements. Negative space, um, varying scales, mixing in large and small blocks in the same quilt rather than having, 3 rows of 4 12-inch
Yeah.
blocks.
Yeah.
I get away from that a lot of times.
Um, so
Yeah, it's really hard for me to pick a favorite color because I love exploring one color family,
mm-hmm.
which I'm going to do a shameless plug right now. I wrote a book with my mom called Monochromatic Quilts, Amazing Variety.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
so this is this one of my passions is being able to dive into one color and see what
Mm-hmm.
you can do to make a quilt that's all reads as one color, but there's so much variation in each color family. And I do that a lot if I have a block challenge, like my guild is doing a rainbow scrap challenge this year.
Mm-hmm.
So each month they pick a different color. Well, I go to my fabric bins and I start pulling so that it's not like I use, if they say red, it's not like I use red and white. I'm going to use
Yeah.
red and, something that's a little more burgundy and something a little more pink. So I have a
Yeah.
bunch of reds in my block.
Yeah. You're using all this what they're called as shades and hues of color because there's
Yep.
both within the color range, and they both depending on what side of that monochromatic thing. I forget what it's
Mhm.
called. I always struggle with these names because I just know how to use color, not what makes
Right.
them tick.
Yeah. And I'm not a trained artist, so I
Yeah,
didn't,
me neither.
we
I just
start
know for some
talking
reason
tints
how
and
to do
hues
it.
and I'm just, let's talk darker and lighter. Let's keep
Yeah,
it generic.
yeah, exactly. Okay, as a quilter, is there anything you have learned that you wish someone would have told you in the beginning?
Um, I have to say that I had really good teachers right from the start. So I don't feel like there was really anything missing from my early quilt journey because I had so many resources that I could just, if
Yeah,
I got stuck on something, I could just ask. Um, One thing that I have noticed more recently in my journey that is probably a helpful tip for beginners is to learn your machine because there are so many marks on the bed of your machine, knowing where your needle position is, how it relates to the edge of the foot. Understanding all those tiny little markings is really going to help you
yeah,
master that 1/4 inch seam that everybody says is so important, which it is, but you can fudge a little bit either way. So
yeah. I think if we could teach all the beginners one thing, if even if their 1/4 inch seam is a little hair off or a little over, you know what I mean? If
Mhm.
we just say be consistent, use the same machine you started out with, use the same stitch that you're using, don't change anything once you start a project and go all the way through the project and keep that consistent, it will come together.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I've seen that happen with the PMQ, is because I hear some people say we should use a scant 1/4 inch. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah,
Well,
as long as all the pieces fit together, I think I'm good.
yeah, exactly. Okay, tell us what you envisioned in the beginning of your quilt journey, and how has that evolved over time?
Well, when I started quilting, it was as I said, I was surrounded by fabric in my mom's shop, and I just wanted to make pretty things. And after the quilt shop closed, and as I've been designing more patterns, I really want to continue sharing the key elements that I'm passionate about. Monochromatic palettes, understanding those color families, and half rectangle triangles are my other passion.
Yeah.
So those two things. So, I dabble in a lot of other styles and components. I'm not only making quilts with half rectangle triangles, but in terms of returning to those elements so that that's what I'm known for, has been an important lesson and a key aspect of this journey that I'm
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Um, have you noticed? I noticed with me, this is what some things, how when you first started out with this and like your mom had the fabric shop, I'm sure that while you were walking around in her shop, you're like, oh, I like this, and this. And maybe you even might have bought this, and this. And then about 5 years later, you're like, what was I thinking? Have you experienced that also?
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's amazing how styles change. Like, we all think back to, well, those of us of a certain age think back to the 80s and early 90s when everything was that dusty rose shade.
Mm-hmm.
My luggage, my bridesmaids dresses, everything was that color, which is like, oh my gosh, that is like not really attractive anymore.
You are right about that.
But
Okay.
yeah, so part of it is that, trends and society changes, and just, we go through these phases when more of those, like reproduction, the Little House on the Prairie colors are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa Gilbert's a big name again. And, so maybe some of those bold, bright colors are gonna fade back into the background for a while, and then, then the cycle will come back and everybody will be like, yeah, we need that neon green and pink from the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah. So since you brought that up, how do you feel about following fabric trends?
It's tough, but important as a designer. You need to be aware of the trends and things out there, because there's always this weight you're trying to balance. How much do I chase what's popular to make sure that I'm visible and on trend and current,
Mm-hmm.
that my patterns or my samples aren't looking dated, that people don't pass them by because they're, old-fashioned colors, whatever old-fashioned is 2 years ago, who knows.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and then there's also the frustration with feeling locked into something that, I'm doing this just because they say I need to be using
Yeah.
these certain color combinations. So it's, you find a balance on how much you're willing to always be totally independent and unique, or if sometimes you're going to play to the popular trends.
So what would you suggest to a beginner who's just diving into this whole show on, should they be following the trends as well, or do you think that they should just go with what makes them happy?
I would always lean towards making yourself happy, because if you're doing something to please someone else, it's hard to do your best work. You have to have that internal motivation to really excel. Um, and then it just depends. If people are just diving into quilting, that's going to be their own hobby, then of course 100% do what you want all the time, never listen to anyone.
Yeah.
If you are a little more business minded, if you want to promote your own patterns and your own work, or, you know, teach on a national level, then yeah, you need to be a little more aware and fit in a little bit. I'm not saying that you need to be totally copycat, because that's not going to work, but you need to be aware of what's out there and where you can position yourself to appeal to a wide audience, as well as bring your own spin on things.
So one of the things I notice is by the time I know there's a new trend, I'm already like a year behind it. So how does someone like me, or someone who's only been doing this maybe 5 to 7 years, how do they know where to go see what the newest trend is so that we can keep up with the trend while we're still learning?
I would say follow some of the major names in the industry. So keep your eyes out on Moda Fabrics. Obviously, they're an industry leader. So what colors are they using in their new lines? You know, when you see a big name like Tula Pink come out with a new fabric collection, is she using a certain color combination? You know, a lot of times Tula's just rainbow everything.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that may not be a good example, but you know, keeping an eye on some of those really well-known names. And then just even, you know, if you get to a store that has a selection of craft magazines, flip through them with the intention of, I need to pay attention to the color combinations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
obviously that's going to be, you know, 6 months out because of the publishing schedule. They have to predict what colors are going to be trending for the new year. But you know, they'll have a lot of times they'll have the current fabric selections, what's the newest line of fabric, and you can get some color ideas and trend ideas like that. And even here on YouTube, just, you know, Google 2026 fabric trends or color trends, and there's all sorts of gurus out there that are willing to share their opinion.
That's actually a great idea about looking for it on YouTube. 2026 color trends.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
yeah.
Okay. What do you like best about making a quilt, and what do you love doing the most? And an example would be, what is it, piecing, binding, quilting? What is your cup of tea?
What was the first part of the question again? Because I know my favorite part, but
What do you like best about making a quilt, and what do you love doing the most?
I love that meme that goes around that says, I love that when I make a quilt, it stays made, because the house is going to get dirty again. So why am I bothering cleaning? That's pretty much my life
That's a good one.
philosophy. The house is just going to get dirty again. So I might as well spend my time in a lasting effort like a quilt.
Yeah.
But that is pretty much in jest. I truly enjoy all stages of the process. I ended up with a long arm within 2 years of making my first full quilt, because I wanted to do all the steps. You know, I absolutely love choosing fabrics. I could pull fabric palettes all day long. If somebody wants my opinion on fabrics, yes, I am with you on a shopping trip. Let's go. But I do enjoy even, you know, the cutting and the piecing. Things stagnate a little bit. They get stuck in the final assembly and the borders sometimes, you know, which is silly, because that's like, you're so close to being done, let's do it.
Yep.
And obviously with a long arm, I love the quilting part of it, and even binding is satisfying for me. But
I actually like binding. I would rather do binding any day than doing borders. And someone says, well, that's the same thing. Actually, no, it's not.
no.
Especially if you're doing borders on a big quilt, you know.
Yeah, but it is nice to, when you have those, you know, those 90-inch edges that you can just sit there and run that long piece through the machine.
Exactly.
Then
Okay. What is your wait, hold on. What is your favorite type of quilt to make and why?
I like to make anything for a challenge, which sounds odd, so let me explain. If someone gives me like a design prompt or a theme,
Mhm.
I love that creative spark. I will take that and I will just start designing stuff so that fits the theme and see if I can make it. And it's so exciting when I can actually make something that fulfills my vision, that's like, oh yes, that turned out exactly how I had it in my head. I'm so happy. So that's been really fun. And I actually spent a couple years as a brand ambassador for Island Batik Fabrics, which just fed
Nice.
into my love of batiks. But yeah, they would have challenges each month and say, like, we want you to make a quilt that features half rectangle or half square triangles,
Yeah.
was one of them. And so I
I
was
would love to be
able
an
to do
ambassador of batiks.
keep your eye out. September, October, November, the fall months, you'll start seeing the call for applications, and you can, it took me I think 3 years in a row. I got rejections before I got accepted, but
Any suggestion or comments you'd like to make on how you can make sure that they'll at least talk to you about being an ambassador?
I would say you definitely want to have some originality. So, and that's not to say you can't do things from other designers, because I certainly used commercially available patterns for some of my quilt challenges. Um, a blog is helpful, so get in the
Okay.
habit of writing about uh, your creations. And then they do look at social media presence. So obviously the YouTube channel
Yep.
is going to be a big plus. Check mark, you've got that. And then just, building up your audience a little bit on the other social platforms, because
Okay.
that's the symbiosis, I guess, of the ambassador relationship. Is, yes, they're giving you some materials to work with, but you need to be promoting them. And
Yeah.
if you
Gotcha.
don't have an audience, if you're not on all the platforms, then
Yeah.
it kind of limits the benefit to the
Okay.
fabric company. So
Okay. That sounds great. Okay. What is the hardest thing about creating a quilt from your perspective?
the hardest thing is just a lot of times sitting down and getting it done, because there are so many options out there. My unfinished pile is huge, because I'm like, okay, I'm having fun with this project. Oh, wait, somebody just said that they've got a new pattern that looks awesome, so I need to make that. And
Yeah.
I get distracted a lot. That crafty ADHD kicks in.
Yeah. I hear you on that. Um, what was I going to say? How do you decide on what? Well, here, let me read. I'm going to ask this in a different way. What comes first, the pattern or the fabric?
This is my Libra personality, because it depends. It's like sometimes I will fall in love with some fabric, like um Tula Pink had a line a couple of years ago now that had the big animals. She had a giraffe, a lion, an elephant, a whole
Mhm.
whole line. Giraffes are my absolute favorite animal. So the minute I saw that giraffe fabric, I had to
Mhm.
have it. And so it was like, okay, now I've got this fabric. How do I want to feature it? And I just went from there. Other times I'm like, okay, I want to make a quilt with this particular star design. How can I color that, and what fabric should I bring in? So I would say it's probably 80 to 90% of the time I start with the pattern. I'm like, okay, I want to make that quilt. So what color scheme do I want to use? What story do I want to tell? Do I want warm colors? Do I want cool colors? Do I want a rainbow? Do I want patriotic? And I'll go from there.
Okay. How many quilts do you think you've made, and how many do you currently have in your sewing room or your house? I don't
Right.
know what your setup is. So.
Yeah, I've taken over most of the house. I have a very understanding family. Oh gosh, I've probably made over 100.
Nice.
I'm like I said, I ignore homework. I only have one child and she's in college, so so I can devote a lot of time to quilting. So I do crank projects out pretty quick. And I probably have over 50 quilts in the house right now because I have the samples. I showed my monochromatic book
Mm-hmm.
earlier. My mom and I wrote a book
Single
with
play, easy
half
way.
rectangle triangles. And so I have all the quilts from this book, just in case someone wants to have me present a trunk show. I've got all my samples.
Yep.
And I've continued to work in series. So I mentioned I was an Island Batik ambassador, so I have most of the quilts from those projects. I have another block of the month that turned into a quilt of the month series, so I've got all
Mm-hmm.
those quilts. So yeah, I need to start donating a lot more than I have.
Speaking of donating, do you donate quite a bit also? I mean, what
I've
who do you donate to, I guess is my question of the day.
Yeah, as I've mentioned, patriotics are a favorite of mine. So Quilts of Valor gets a lot of donations from me. And then we just wherever I hear of a group collecting quilts in my local area, like my local guild supports a uh, family shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll take quilts, which is nice because then you can do both feminine and masculine quilts and kids quilts, and support that family center. Um, so yeah, just if Project Linus I've donated to, just whenever I hear of a group collecting quilts, I'll try to donate one because I
Yeah.
certainly have them available.
Okay, that's great. Um, I know this is going to be a strange question. Do you name your quilts, and do you put labels on your quilts?
Yes, I name them labels most of the time, especially if they are going to be on display somewhere. Entering quilt shows is a great incentive for labeling your
Yeah.
quilts and donating. I definitely want to have something on the label with a name. And yeah, as a pattern writer, that's kind of part of the process is coming up with a name for the quilt. So I generally will do something. And that's one of the things that I love about quilting and that I mentioned earlier is being able to tell a story with the fabric. And so having a title, having a name associated with that, what the quilt means, what the story is behind it is a fun aspect is to, sometimes it takes a little bit of research. You don't want to have the same name as 15 other patterns that are out there.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah,
have to get
definitely.
a little bit creative.
So when you're designing your pattern, do you already have a name in mind, or does the name come after the fact? And I'll explain what I mean by that. So far I've done two quilt designs, but they've in here, and I've been doing as a sew along on my channel. So we might right now we're working on one right now that's a sew along, and I don't even have a name for it. And we've been working on it since February, I still don't have a name. And I did that last year. We started out with one, and it didn't get named until like 6 months after we were close to finishing it. And
Yeah,
so how do you?
I generally name my quilt and maybe halfway through the process. Once the design's pretty much set, then I can start referring to it by name.
Okay,
So
what is your go-to thread for the main machine you sew on and for your long arm?
for my piecing, I generally use Aurifil.
Okay.
And for my long arm, I actually use Omni thread, which is by Superior Threads. Yeah,
Okay.
I have that right.
What is your go-to sewing machine and go-to long arm? Because you mentioned you had a long arm.
Oh my goodness. My long arm is a Gamel Classic Plus. So
Oh my gosh.
it does have a stitch regulator, but I do not have a computer system. So everything I do is hand guided. So you're not going to get perfect circles and things from
Yeah.
me because, you know, it's like my signature. You're going to get all the little wobbles in there. My domestic machine, I have and what you'll see on most of my YouTube videos is my Baby Lock Aria, which is a great machine. It's just a little too fancy for what I need. My go-to machine that has traveled everywhere and has made most of my quilts over the entire 20 years that I've been quilting is a little Janome Gem Gold. And I'm so bummed that they don't make that anymore because it is a great little starter machine.
I bought a Janome gem that's in California, so when I go over there, I can sew. But I have a Janome 6700P, and oh my God, I'm just in love with it. Besides your mom and yourself, is there anyone else in your family who creates quilts?
My sister-in-law has done a little bit of quilting. My grandparents and, you know, great aunts and things like that. I've got some of their patchwork, so that's really
Oh, that's
really
awesome.
cool to have some family
Yeah.
heirloom type quilts that were made in the 1930s and 40s. But we haven't well, I was going to say we haven't enticed the younger generation. My daughter has made one quilt. So she's been exposed to the whole process and she
Yep.
saw it through at a kids camp one year. And my niece is really into crochet these days. So maybe she'll touch the sewing machine as she gets a little older, but
Yeah. Yeah.
not right now. And I come from a really small family, so I don't have
Yeah.
you know, a huge family tree to talk about there.
When did you start your YouTube channel? Why did you name it what you named it? And I know there's like multiple things to this question.
Uh-huh.
Um, what were your goals in the beginning, and have they changed now that you're further along in it?
I don't think my goals have really changed all that much in terms of the broad picture because I started my channel in 2019. I took, I had left my job as a high school classroom teacher. And it just, you know, midlife crisis, I was ready to go do something different. I
Yeah.
was going to try and um, make a full-time income from quilting, which unfortunately has not happened yet. But the YouTube channel was a piece of that. I'm trying to showcase my teaching skills and my pattern designs there. And it's along the way, it's just grown into a fabulous community. So I want to thank everybody that comes along for the ride. And my channel is True Blue Quilts, which is also my business name. And that really comes from my Air Force heritage, the long blue line
Yeah.
of Air Force service. I'm the third generation Air Force officer in my family.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That's awesome. What do you love most about having a new YouTube channel, and what do you dislike the most about it?
It's the same thing with the quilting world. It's the community. I have met so many fun people and just really made some good friendships. And conversations like this, Katie, this has been wonderful. So that's been the best part of having a YouTube channel, and then being able to geek out over some of the business aspects by other
Yeah.
people that are also trying to grow their YouTube channel, use it as a potential income stream and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Is really fun. Looking at the strategy, which is kind of the worst thing, is like, what does the algorithm want from us?
Yeah, I still don't understand the algorithm. I mean, I can tell that my channel's doing okay, and I and it's been bound like I was on a plateau from February until about 4 days ago. I mean, the numbers just
Yeah, and it's so hard to tell. We were talking earlier about trends, and that was, it's like being in the right place at the right time with the right topic. I know a lot of channels did videos that talked about the whole Joanne's bankruptcy
yeah,
situation,
that was a
and
big thing. Oh my goodness, everybody was talking about it.
yeah,
Everybody
so
but me.
right. Well, and I didn't ever shop at Joann's, so it wasn't something that I needed to comment on. I mean, certainly I
Yeah.
have thoughts, but um, one of the things I did a few years ago that really skyrocketed my channel from about 3,000 subscribers to over 10,000 was I put out a video about blocks that you can make from jelly rolls, and I released it on Sew a Jelly Roll Day. So thank you to Moda Fabrics for creating a quilting holiday that happens every September.
Yeah.
And like I said, having the right topic at the right time, and so keep your eye out for some of those quirky holidays that you can,
You know the exact date that they do the jelly roll thing? Because always, by the time I know about it, it's too late.
I think it's around the third Saturday, but I'd have to double check. We have plenty of time since
Okay.
we're a few months out. We can get those dates and make sure we're ready with a
Yeah.
new jelly roll pattern.
Let's go.
Or,
Okay.
or just even have a jelly roll on hand and do do a live stream that day that's
Yeah.
features
I did
jelly
a
rolls.
challenge with my husband 2 weeks ago, and we cracked it because I only had 3 jelly rolls in my house, and so we cracked one that I think I must have won through somebody's channel. It was a Deb Strain fabric line called Salsa,
Mhm.
and so it's got peppers and tomatoes. It's got all these funny food things on it, And so we divided it in half, and the challenge was he was going to sew sets of 3, and then we were going to subcut them down. And he watched me subcut some of mine, and then at some point he comes in and he says, "I'm doing this my way," and he subcut it, and he sewed it how he wanted to, and he did it. It was
Mhm.
great. He hadn't touched the sewing machine since he was a kid, and
Yeah.
he had fun with it, and that was all from a jelly roll.
Yeah, jelly rolls are really, really
Yeah,
fun to work with. Although I tend to cut my own strips
I like
because
cutting them too.
I find that if you make a whole quilt from one collection, it's too matchy,
Yeah,
and that is my
it kind
one
of
complaint
stifles your
about the
creativity.
Cotton Cuts puzzle mystery quilts is when you have
Yeah,
two fabrics that are the same print in different colors. I'm like, I
yeah.
change one of them because I don't want to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
No
that's probably why I
repeats.
stopped buying. I think that's why I stopped buying jelly rolls. Because I decided I buy yardage, or I try to as much as I can. Yardage and half, or yardage and fat quarters, because you can cut
Mhm.
strips from those too.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's see here. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to spotlight you so you're on the screen all by yourself, and we're going to have a mini trunk show. And what I want you to do is tell us about each quilt that you're going to show us. And
Okay.
then after that, we're going to do a um what I call rapid fire. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the quilt behind me is called the Fast Track Sampler, and I wanted to share this one because I am having a quilt along for this pattern over the summer. So be sure to visit True Blue Quilts to get signed up for that. And there are 3 different blocks in this quilt that feature half rectangle triangles. So we're going to learn how to make half rectangle triangles. No special rulers required. We can do it all very simply and easily. And that has really been my design spark over the last few years. So you'll see some information about the Tour de Fabric this summer. And I teach a class in that program with half rectangle triangles, always fun to make just some simple diamonds. And then I've also used the half rectangle triangle to reinterpret some classic blocks.
Oh, wow.
And the X and O blocks I'm calling Hugs and Kisses. And those patterns are part of the Fall in Love with Quilting Club that is free to sign up. And I've got links to that all over my channel. So
Okay.
that's one of the things I like to do is join in these collaborations with other designers. And, you know, like I said, I love the challenge of being given a prompt and then having to come up with my own design interpretation of that. So the Fall
That
in Love with
yellow that's on
Quilting.
the yellow on the quilt, what is that? Did
This
you
is
paint? Yeah, is that painting on there or what did you do?
no, that you're seeing the stitching, the pantograph that I used for
Oh,
the
got you.
quilting design.
Okay.
And that's just a yellow, it's a
Oh,
friendship star made from
okay, got you.
half rectangle triangles.
Oh, okay.
So there you can see it a little
Yeah, now I
better
can
with
see it
the,
now. Yeah, thank you for pushing
yeah,
it back a little bit.
yeah.
I
So I
couldn't
did
tell
the
what it was.
friendship star, I did some flying geese with half rectangle triangles, and then I've got the zigzag block
Nice.
down there. If I can,
That's pretty. Awesome.
so that is my half rectangle triangle era. The other quilt I wanted to show, and I'm a little bit stuck for space, so I'll try to do this.
Okay.
This was from
Oh,
the Island Batik era.
that's beautiful.
They had a challenge to make a New York beauty themed design. So I just took the blocks and I call this quilt Serpentine. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to do another version and actually write the pattern for this. I
That would
did
be great.
2 different
Wow.
color versions in the quilt,
Uh-huh.
um, just because I wanted to feature as much of the fabric that they gave me as I could.
Yeah, that's lovely.
So yeah, I do a little bit of a lot of different techniques. So yeah, it's just been a lot of fun.
Okay. Do you have more?
That was all I brought.
Oh, okay.
We
Okay.
could be here for hours if I grabbed, you know, like I said, the other 50 that are up in the closet.
Do you still have the first quilt you ever made or no?
I do. I'll actually send you the video link where I share my first quilt because
Okay, great.
it it was a simple pattern of just kind of improv strips, almost all the same width. So it wasn't crazy improv. It was just, you know, cut them into a bunch of different sizes and sew them all together. And it was so much fun picking the focus fabric that of course had giraffes in it, and then finding all these other coordinating prints that I could throw into this really scrappy, really fun quilt.
That's great. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to slide into what I call rapid fire, and I'm going to ask some strange questions. Some will be strange, some will not. The first one does not have to be quilty related, but what is your favorite guilty pleasure?
My favorite guilty pleasure is dark chocolate. So
Okay.
that's become more popular, but when I was a kid, it was like no one wanted the special dark in the Hershey's mixed
Yeah,
bag. And I was like, yeah, pass them all to me.
me. It's like when they would go, I'd take the kids Halloween trick-or-treating. I would swipe all their Smarties out of their stash.
Yeah, that's a close second for
Yeah,
sugar treat.
I
Yeah.
love Smarties. Okay, what is your favorite quilting tool?
Oh my goodness. I have to say the add a quarter ruler. I
Okay.
love paper piecing. So that's, standard supply for FPP, but I also find it super helpful for trimming up half square triangles and flying geese units. And, anytime you need to trim excess off your seam, just
Mm-hmm.
grab your add a quarter ruler. That's a very handy tool.
Yep. What quilting item do you wish you had been the inventor of?
Seam ripper. I'd be rich.
What was your worst quilting disaster and were you able to resolve it?
Oh my goodness, yes. And again, I've got a video about that. Um, there have been several times where I have made boo-boos on the long arm, and my fatal flaw is that I always think it won't be that bad when it's done. So I continue sewing way past the time when I should have just stopped and ripped it out. So there have been not one, not two, but probably at least 3 times that I've had to rip out all the quilting from a queen size quilt.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's a
those
lot of.
are horrible disasters, but as the quilting marine likes to say, it's only fabric, it's only thread. So yeah, I put on a good podcast and I spend a few days with Jack.
Yep, yep. What would you like to do in the world of quilting that you haven't already done?
Hmm. I would like to finish sewing my double wedding ring. I started that way too early in my quilting career, and curves were very difficult for someone who had not sewn very much. I've gotten much better, as I showed you with my New York Beauty. I can sew curves now, so it's time to take that project out of the back shelf of the closet and get that one done.
If you could watch anyone quilt a quilt, who would it be?
Oh goodness. I am going to say that I would like to spend time at the long arm with my friend Susan Smith.
Okay.
She has a channel called Stitched by Susan. She is a very accomplished long arm quilter, and she just makes up her own edge to edge designs. And I I can do feathers over a whole quilt, but I think I could learn a lot from her. So that's who I'm going to pick.
If you weren't a quilter, what would you do?
Oh my goodness. I am an instructional designer by day. So I said I taught high school for a lot of years, and then now I develop training materials for adults. So I still have a full-time job, but if I could like do anything and, make enough money to live, I think it would be cool. I've always had the dream of being a novelist. So I'd like to be able to write stories that have a logical beginning, middle, and end. I tend to ramble in the middle and never get to the point.
Yeah. Besides quilting, what are your other hobbies, or is it just exclusively quilting?
It's pretty exclusively quilting these days. I have a few unfinished cross stitch projects from back in the day, so that was a hobby. I love to read, and I actually have been doing a lot more of that lately. I do know how to knit and occasionally crochet, but I would need more lessons on crochet if I was going to do a full project there. But yeah, that keeps me entertained.
Okay. Tell us something about yourself that might surprise all of us.
Well, as I mentioned, my channel name links to my Air Force heritage, and we moved, I think, 8 times when I was a
Sounds
kid. I went to three different high schools.
Hey,
So,
yeah, what is your favorite color? And I know you mentioned it, but why do you love this favorite color?
obviously, if you see my channel name, my favorite color is blue. And I can't really say why. It's always been my favorite. From the time I was a little girl, blue has always been my favorite. Which is funny because I think back over the years, and there was a lot of yellow in my bedroom as a kid. So
Quite well, so there's that.
yeah. But when I was able to, choose the bedding and everything, it was always blue.
What 5 skills should a beginner quilter learn about to help them become better quilt makers while they're learning?
Yeah. I think like 2 important skills / characteristics would be keeping an open mind and listening, because keeping an open mind, there's more than one way to do something. So you're going to be around quilters who have different techniques. And with an open mind, you can learn from them and then decide if it's something that fits how you work. Some people's minds work differently, and so they just can't grasp the way one person does it. But when they go to another method, it makes sense and they're perfectly happy. And then listening, because, and this is advice for me as well as everybody else, as I've explained, I tend to rush ahead and think I can do it in my ways right. But if I would slow down and listen a little closer, then I might avoid some of the problems. So those are 2 big ones. I mentioned earlier, get to know your machine, because it can help you out quite a bit. If you like your bobbin cover tends to have little lines, and one of those lines will be a 1/4 inch, and that helps you line your fabric up and find that good seam allowance. Don't stress too much. It's fabric, it moves. Sometimes you can line everything up and it still doesn't come out right. I just say that sometimes fabric has a mind of its own. You have to let it do what it wants to do. But a caveat to that is that you're allowed to set your own standard of perfection. Like, I have a friend who will do a pinwheel block, and she will rip that sucker out 3 or 4 times to get that center exactly lined up, when I would have said the very first attempt was fine and let's just keep going.
I know what you mean by that.
So yeah, you
Oh
get to decide how perfect your quilts need to be. So yeah, and just sit back and enjoy the journey. There's a lot of different techniques, tons of different fabric to play with. So just keep creating.
Yep. What 5 tools should every beginner quilter start out with, and why?
Oh, goodness. Well, the ruler, the mat, and the rotary cutter, if we're going to count those as 3 or bundle them together, those are kind of the trifecta that you need to start out with. I like to have a small pair of embroidery scissors next to my machine whenever I'm quilting. I love the Clover glass head silk pins to pin my fabric. And I teach a beginner class, and I always, cry a little bit on the inside when people come in with the tin of sewing pins from their grandmother that's got like the huge white knob on the top, and they're so thick. And I'm like, no, we want tiny little sharp pins.
Yeah.
So those would be some key tools. And in terms of rulers, I actually recommend 2 for beginners. I think you need the 6" by 24".
Yeah.
And I like to use 6.5. So it always throws me off if people have the one that ends on the whole inch. I need that extra ½ inch. But that 24 inches long is really important so that you can cut your yardage and your fat quarters down. But then I always reach for my 6.5 inch square to do the smaller cuts.
Yep. Okay. What advice would you give concerning how to take care of quilts to make them last a long time?
Ooh, one of the good tips that I have learned is about folding. But before I get into ways to make them last, I want to encourage people to use your quilts. You made them to be used. So go ahead and put them in the car, take them on picnics and play dates and, to the kids' soccer games. And, if they end up with grass stains, they've lived a good life and they've fulfilled their purpose. So don't be afraid to use your quilts. But in terms of making them last longer, I remember hearing about folding your quilts, and I'll do a quick demo here, but like fold it on an odd diagonal and not just, pairing up the corners, because if you fold your quilts, like we've all been taught with our sheets and towels to put them in nice folds right on the right down the center, you're going to get really embedded lines. That batting is going to constrict and you're never going to get those wrinkles out. So if you do an odd fold, like somehow on the bias on the diagonal of your quilt, they will last a lot longer. You won't end up with those hard lines in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. What advice would you give to a beginner quilter?
Oh, we've gone over so many good tips.
Yeah, you've already gone over some things. Is there any additional things you would like to add to that?
I would say invest in the best tools you can. You're not going to save a lot of money by buying cheap, and there's a difference between cheap and frugal. Obviously, we all have budgets and we need to not be spending money foolishly, but buy the best you can afford, because the headaches you get with some of these off-brand really, like, you can tell the difference between cheap plastic and metal tools. One's going to hold up a lot longer. So if you decide that this is a hobby you want to continue, I hate to see beginners throw down, thousands of dollars for all these expensive tools and machines. See what you can borrow from a friend or a more experienced quilter. And then as you learn how to use the tool, you can decide whether it's worth the investment. Yeah. So there's another tip for beginners. Go to, keep your ears open for when those shop hop type events are. Go to one of the bigger shows where there's a lot of vendors and you can walk around and see some of the different products and compare so that you can make an informed decision.
Yep, that's a great idea. what advice would you give to any other quilter? Just everybody.
I think everybody should take an in-person class regularly
Okay.
because you're going to learn something from everybody, whether it's a great new technique that saves you a ton of time or just something you never want to do again. So it's really good to do that, to stretch your horizons, to, spark some additional creativity when you hear new ideas, and just get out there and meet other quilters. You may be inspiring to the person next to you in
Yeah.
class, just as much as you get that inspiration from the teacher. So be part of
So
the community.
So those of us who live remotely, or there is people who can't leave their homes, what online schooling would you recommend?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mentioned a couple of the summits that I am involved in this year. Fall in Love with Quilting Club is one of them, and Tour de Fabric is happening in July of 2025. So, and even, I mean, Katie, you're doing a great thing with all your live broadcasts on YouTube. So just find some YouTube friends, because you can say hi in the comments, show up a few weeks in a row, and we get to know you. And it's really fun to have that community
Well,
online.
I didn't know about you until that night you saw
Mm,
me in your live, and I'm like, I didn't even know who that. I think it was Sean was the one who mentioned you. It was either because I saw you on his video, or he was talking about you in a live, and
yeah.
because Sean's been the mentor these days.
Yeah, he is such a enthusiastic quilt representative. He does he's very welcoming to everybody, and it's one of those funny chains of events. I host a podcast for anyone who is interested, wants to learn a little bit more about the business behind quilts. It's called Quilting on the Side, and I knew Chris O'Neill, who
I
has
interviewed her.
has Sew the Distance, and she was on my podcast, and
Yeah.
she was talking about Cotton Cuts puzzle mystery quilts, and she mentioned Sean. So then I started watching Sean. I invited him on my podcast, and then through his community I met you. So
Is there
it's
anything else that you would like to share with us that we haven't already talked about?
um well, we could go on for hours in all sorts
All
of
right.
different directions, right? But
Oh,
um no, I'm so thankful for the opportunity to talk quilting and to share what I've been doing. So thanks so much for having me.
you're welcome. So tell us again the name of your channel, and can you tell us what days of the week you go live, and when do you usually drop pre-records if you do those?
Yeah, you can find me at True Blue Quilts. So all the social platforms, YouTube channel, website, everything is True Blue Quilts. And I go live Wednesday afternoons. That is my Whip Wednesday sew and chat. And I am usually able to sit down and sew around 4 p.m. Pacific, which is 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday evenings.
Okay.
And I generally get a long form video out on Saturdays. So look for those. I am having so much fun as a Cotton Cuts puzzle mystery quilt ambassador. So we're kicking off a new design here in a few months, so people can sign up for that.
Which colorway are you working on right now?
I am doing the Flyway Odyssey colors, which is the tans and blacks. So it's more of a masculine neutral colorway for Flyway.